So today's lesson is going to involve around a very important yet under talked about characteristic of magicians, and that is their character. Now, what a character is how the audience perceives you. There are many different aspects of this facet that people tend to ignore, however, make all the difference in spectators remembering you, remembering your magic, and remembering aspects about your performance that they wouldn't otherwise care about unless you've established your character correctly. So today we're going to talk about some things to do with character, ways to find your character, and more importantly, things to avoid when creating a character. Now, if you notice, the greatest magicians that we know, their characters are just extensions of their own personality with the volume turned up. That's kind of the best advice that I've heard and the best advice that I could possibly give you. You look at people like Greg Wilson, David Williamson, David Blaine, Jay Sankey. You look at all these characters, you look at the way they perform, you look at the way they actually act, and you notice that it's just an extension of their personality. That way, it becomes a little bit more natural. It becomes something that you are already acquainted with because you know you. So all you're doing is just turning up the volume. One of the questions that I get asked the most is if I act the way that I do to people, the way that I do in my videos. And the honest to God truth is sometimes. It depends on the context. And that's something that you're going to need to figure out because what might work for one group is definitely not going to work for another group. And context is something that you're definitely going to have to be aware of when thinking of your character. Because if your character is a very extraneous, is a very exaggerated person, and you happen to be doing or saying things that could be perceived as offensive, you need to really watch out as to the audience that you perform for. Whereas in some bars, in some situations, it might be fine. If you get a corporate gig and you start busting out bitch jokes, people might not necessarily be inclined to hire you the next year. Another important facet about your character is that it should be implied. It shouldn't be stated. Imagine if you go to a movie and the entire plot is just laid out for you in an exposition in the first 10 minutes of the movie. You're not really going to have a great experience watching that movie, are you? However, if the story is well told and well crafted throughout the entirety of the movie, you're going to feel like this narrative actually makes sense and it has good pacing. So it's best to show and not tell. If you're coming right off the bat and saying aspects about you and your personality and your character, explaining to the spectator, you've already lost the battle. They should be implied in the way you speak. They should be implied in the way you talk. They should be implied in the way you stand. There are all these little things that add to the overall picture of you as a person and you as a character. However, again, it's best to be implied and not stated. As I mentioned earlier, context is something that really dictates what aspects of your personality and what aspects of your character could you truly have in front of a group of people. Now, context and consistency are also very, very important because imagine if you're in a bar setting and it's very rowdy, people are drinking, they're going to have a good time. They're going to be less inclined to be offended than if, for example, you are doing a restaurant gig, walk around at a family restaurant, or you're doing a corporate gig where you're wearing a suit and tie and everything has to be very posh and very nice. So you're not going to use the same language in one that you do in the other, which is why context matters. Consistency is also something that's key. Marlowe tells this great story of one time when he's in a hotel and this magician introduces himself to him. And the guy is very shy. He approaches Marlowe. He shakes his hand very meagerly. He sits down and they have a conversation. And this guy's very mousy, very introverted sort of personality. But then finally, the topic of magic comes up and the guy goes, "Would you like to see some of my tricks?" Marlowe, of course, says, "Yes, of course, I would love to see your tricks." And that instant, the guy completely changes his personality. He's going extroverted. His hands, his gesture, his whole body language pretty much changes drastically from this mousy-like character to this, "Oh, watch this over here." And that's a great story to reflect on consistency because best characters in magic are just the magicians with their own personalities, with the volume turned up a little bit. Which leads us to the next point, which is your character not having to be outrageous. It doesn't have to be over the top. We have an outrageous character like Dan Sperry, who's a wonderful magician. You look at the way he acts, you look at the way he performs, and you're like, wow, anywhere the guy walks in, he gets attention. You don't have to be that. You could be, but you don't have to be. It could just be something of an extension of you, an extension of your personality with the volume turned up a little bit, with, a little bit more care to tone of voice, a little bit more care to direction and blocking, a little bit more care of all these things. It's just attention to these small things that really, really end up making a huge difference. So your character doesn't have to be outrageous. It doesn't have to be over the top. It could be if you choose to go that route. But just don't think whenever you think character, you have to be this over the top magician. You really don't have to be. One of the more persistent issues in magic when it comes to character development is pattern. Now, pattern is the difference between a great magician and an average magician. When you notice a great magician, you shouldn't even notice their pattern. Their pattern is natural, their pattern is organic, their pattern is just part of what it is that they're trying to show you. However, an average magician, it's very obvious that they've rehearsed something. It's very obvious that they're just going into the script that they remember. It doesn't seem natural. It doesn't seem like it's organic. It just seems like, oh, wow, okay, so this is a play that I'm watching. And you're going to see this a lot with certain magicians where it almost feels like the spectator doesn't even need to be there. I'm sure you've seen this where a magician is doing a trick for a spectator and the spectator reacts in a certain way and the magician doesn't skip a beat. The magician just keeps at with his rehearsed pattern. He keeps at it with his rehearsed routine because he doesn't know what to do at that point if something were to happen, if somebody were to come in with a plate of food, or if somebody were to get interrupted. A magician has rehearsed this trick so much that he doesn't understand what to do if something were to interrupt him at that point. And that is kind of the worst trap you could get into. You need to understand that people are people. People have reactions. They have human reactions. And when it comes to magic, you're showing them something that they're not seeing on a day-to-day basis. You're showing them something that's out of the ordinary, that's extraordinary. So if you have this amazing trick and you have this great thing, but the pattern is just this rigid set pattern that seems like it's something you've rehearsed and practiced, and there's no room for interaction, there's no room for the spectator to go in there and be like, wow, that's great. That's really going to do a detriment on your character, and that's really going to do a detriment on how the spectators remember you. Because again, I think to me, the most important thing is the spectators remembering you. If they remember the trick, great. But ultimately, I wanted to say, oh, you should have seen this guy, Jonathan, the other day. He was getting this card and putting it on. I don't know what he did, but he was the greatest magician I've ever seen. I much prefer something like that than... So I saw this magician the other day. He took my card, put it in the middle, and then it jumped on top. He was great. I don't remember his name, though. I much prefer the first than the latter because, again, they remember you. It should be an extension of you. They should be having a good time. And even though the magic is the conduit for this interaction, at the end of the day, they should remember you more than the trick. Another important point is realism. You need to be realistic when it comes to your character. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a magician who is 15, 16, in their teenage years, and they're talking about gambling style tricks, and they're talking about gambling and all these moves that a gambler might know, and it's like you don't have the experience for that. So make sure that whenever you have a character, you're thinking of your potential characters, that they're realistic for the age that you are. A 13, 14, 15, or 16-year-old is not going to have the experience to talk about gambling, whereas somebody who's older might not necessarily have the same experiences as somebody who's younger. So be realistic in terms of your age when coming up with a character. The last point I want to make is it's very easy to copy magicians that you see and that you look up to. I did it, and I think most other magicians also did it. But I feel like it's a detriment to you coming up with your own unique character because then you just become a parody and you just become a copy of that magician. And if they happen to be a well-known magician, people are going to realize that all you're doing is just copying David Blaine, Chris Angel, David Williamson, Greg Wilson. So while it might benefit you to pick and choose different things from their characters so you could kind of establish your own character, don't just flat out copy somebody because at the end of the day, you're just going to become an imitation of them and you want to be your own unique person. You want to have your own unique personality and your own unique character. So you don't want to end up just copying somebody else thinking that, oh, they've already done the work for me. All I have to do is just regurgitate patter the way these magicians say it. Come up with your own character. Be unique. Even if it takes a little bit longer, even if it takes some trial and error, eventually you're going to get it if you're consistent. So a good illustration of this idea of building a character is with a peek. So imagine that you have the spectator peek at a card. They look at the 3 of spades, in this case, 3 of clubs, sorry. Out of focus, boy. They look at the 3 of clubs. You have them imagine the card right here in the air. If you're a mentalist, if you have this sort of mental style perception, you might use your apparent psychic ability or your apparent intuitive ability to try to determine what that card is. So you say, imagine the card over here. I want you to see it as if you're projecting a card. I see that it's black. You know, you can go whatever sort of presentation you want to give, but you're trying to give and exude the traits that a psychic might have. Whereas, for example, if you're trying to read their poker tells, you might do the exact same trick, the exact same peek, have them imagine their card over here and say, you know, by the inflection in your tone, I could tell that you're thinking of a red card, right? Yes? Okay, good. Exactly the way you just told me that. I know that it's a heart. So the same trick could apply to different sort of personalities and different types of characters. One might apply towards a mentalist. Another one might apply towards a gambler. If you want to do it as a magician, then you might, for example, have a joker. In this case, the joker in this deck happens to be a banana, so it might not work as well for this deck. But imagine you have a joker on top. You have the spectator peek at a card, right? In this case, 6 of spades. You say, sir, you peeked at a card. Now, I haven't seen it. However, guess who has seen it? The joker. That's right, the joker. Now, the joker's actually going to whisper the identity of your card. It's a black card, right? Yeah, okay. It's definitely a spade. Yep, for sure, definitely a spade. I'm going to say, actually, the joker's telling me that you picked the 6 of spades. Is that true? And of course, the spectators are going to react accordingly. Now, again, this is just an example for you to think about different ways to present things with the same trick. But this is essentially the same trick done in 3 different ways. You're peeking at a card, right? You're getting a glimpse with that peek that we talked about, and you're presenting in whatever way fits your character. So if you want a little bit more of a magical routine with this, you could have the spectator hold on to the joker. They peek at any card in the deck, right? In this case, 2 of clubs. This card gets controlled to the top of the deck in whatever way you want. In this case, I'm just getting a break above it, doing a double undercut. Their card is now on top of the deck, which I could very easily peek at the card. So once they give me back the joker, I could just point at the joker. I'm getting a break here below the top card of the deck. And as I turn the deck over, I see the little index there, which is going to allow me to know the identity of the card. In this case, it's the 2 of clubs. So now I could say that the joker is actually going to tell me what the card is. So, oh, okay. All right, that's cool. Yeah, it's a black card. It's a club. At some point in time, you could do a top change, changing the joker for their card. Still pretend like the joker is telling you information here. Oh, your card's a 2? That's kind of interesting. You know, it's actually more interesting. This joker is actually your card. You know, you can have a little bit of a magical ending for that. But again, it's the same way of presenting the trick, 3 different ways. Of course, that one has a little bit of a twist ending. But depending on your character, depending on your personality, you could add, you could take things away and have it fit your character and your personality. One last tip that I'm going to give you guys is don't be afraid to take things away. As I just mentioned, I feel like the majority of people think they need to add things, they need to give more, they need to add more, they need to have more tricks. Sometimes the best thing to do is take things away. So if you have a personality, if you have a certain character that you want to establish, think about things that you want to take away. Think about things that you can take away to add to your character and your overall presentation. So just think about that. I hope you guys enjoyed this lesson on character, on kind of establishing your character, things to do, things not to do. Thank you guys again for being amazing patrons. I'm really glad to have your support here, and I hope to see you on the next lesson.